The courtroom was dead silent. Maya Harris stood tall, her Medal of Honor gleaming beneath the harsh lights. Her mother's voice shattered the silence. "Take that disgrace off. You don't belong here." Her sister's cold whisper pierced the air. "You'll never be part of this family." But Maya didn't flinch. She wasn't here for them. In that moment, she placed the medal on the table, the sound of it ringing like thunder. No words, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any insult. This is her story of betrayal, survival, and the truth that would change everything. The courthouse was cold and imposing. The smell of old wood and worn leather filled the air as Maya Harris stepped into the room, her boots clicking sharply against the marble floors. She could feel the eyes of the room on her as she made her way down the aisle toward the witness stand. Dressed in her full military uniform with the Medal of Honor gleaming proudly on her chest, she couldn't help but feel the weight of it, not just from the metal, but from the expectation, the judgment. As she took her seat, her gaze was drawn to the gallery where her family sat, facing her with cold, hard expressions. Her mother, Genevieve, was sitting in the front row, her face as perfect and smooth as ever, despite the tension that crackled in the air. The pearls around her neck seemed to shimmer in the light, a stark contrast to the fury Maya could feel radiating off her. Genevieve's lips parted, her gaze flickering between the Medal of Honor and Maya herself. Maya could almost hear her thoughts, each one more cutting than the last. Beside her, her sister Isabella sat, her posture impeccable as always, an aura of superiority that Maya could almost feel physically. Isabella's eyes met hers for a moment, a flicker of disdain passing between them. Genevieve's voice broke the silence like glass shattering. "Take that disgrace off," she said, her words sharp and venomous. "You're not worthy of wearing that. Take it off, Maya." The words hung in the air, louder than any bomb Maya had ever heard explode in battle. She remained seated, not reacting to the command. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the familiar sting of rejection crawling up her throat, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was her weapon, a weapon far stronger than any words could ever be. But her mother wasn't done. "You've defiled the Harris name," Genevieve continued, her voice cracking with a fury that Maya hadn't expected. "You're a disgrace, a stain on this family. I can't even look at you in that uniform. Do you have any idea how this looks to people?" Maya's heart clenched, but she didn't flinch. She had been called worse in the heat of battle, had faced more daunting opponents than her mother's cruel words. She had fought for her country, for people who didn't care about her past or where she came from. Yet here, in this courtroom, her own flesh and blood were determined to strip away everything she had earned, everything she had sacrificed. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she spoke, her voice low but biting. "You'll never belong here, Maya," she whispered, just loud enough for Maya to hear. "You think that medal gives you something? You think you're better than us? You're not. You never will be." The venom in Isabella's voice cut deeper than her mother's. It wasn't just about the uniform or the medal anymore. It was about Maya's very existence. Her sister, the golden child, had made it clear. Maya was a burden, a mistake, someone who could never be part of their world. Maya's fingers tightened around the armrests of the chair, the knuckles turning white. She could feel the familiar weight of the military garb, the weight of the duty she had carried all these years. She wasn't just a soldier in this moment, she was a daughter, and yet she was made to feel as if she didn't belong in her own family. The room felt smaller now, the whispers from the gallery, the eyes that once looked at her with something resembling respect, now turned to something else, something like pity, like she was a failure, a shadow of the family name. The familiar faces of friends of the family were now just spectators, watching her crumble beneath the weight of their judgment. Maya swallowed hard, feeling the lump in her throat, but she refused to let the tears come. She had learned to hoard those, to keep them locked away in the deepest parts of her soul. She wasn't about to let them see her break. The clerk called her name, and with a steadying breath Maya stood. The sound of her boots on the floor echoed in the room, each step a reminder of the path she had chosen, the sacrifices she had made. She didn't look at her family as she walked to the stand. She didn't need to see them. She had already felt their contempt, already seen the judgment in their eyes. As Maya sat down on the witness stand, she could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Her mother's gaze was heavy on her, like a weight pressing down on her chest. Genevieve's eyes flicked back to the Medal of Honor, still pinned to Maya's chest. Her mouth twisted into a look of pure disgust. It was as though the medal, the symbol of her courage, of everything she had fought for, was somehow more offensive than anything else. Maya didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at anyone. She stared straight ahead, breathing slowly, methodically. She wasn't there for them. She wasn't there to seek their approval. She was there for one reason only, to stand tall in the face of their rejection and prove that she didn't need their acceptance to be worthy. Her mother's voice came again, colder this time. "You've ruined this family, Maya," Genevieve spat. "I never wanted a daughter like you." Maya's heart broke, but she didn't let it show. Her silence, her refusal to let their words break her, was all the resistance she needed. Maya's heart was heavy as she sat there, the weight of her mother's words still echoing in her mind. "You've ruined this family," Genevieve had said, as though Maya's very existence was the source of all their pain. The sting of rejection, the long years of being an outsider in her own home, came crashing down on her like a wave. She had spent so long trying to prove her worth, trying to gain their approval, only to realize in this moment that nothing she did would ever be enough for them. The pain settled in her chest like a rock, immovable and suffocating. Every memory of her childhood, every sacrifice she had made, came flooding back. The long hours she had spent training, the grueling tests, the blood, sweat and tears she had poured into her service. All of it, every bit of her effort, felt like it had been for nothing. Her family would never see her for what she truly was, a soldier, a woman who had earned her place, a daughter who had done her best. To them, none of it mattered. She was still the same disappointment they had always seen her as. Maya wanted to lash out. She wanted to shout, to scream, to tell her family exactly how she felt, to tell them how deeply their rejection had hurt her, how much it had scarred her. But as she sat there, her fingers clenched tightly on the armrests, something inside her clicked. She had already fought enough. She had already fought for her place in the world, for the respect she had earned on the battlefield. She didn't need to fight for their approval anymore. It wasn't worth it. With that realization, Maya made a choice. She would not respond to their cruelty. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The anger, the hurt, the frustration, she would bury it all. She would hold her ground, not with words, but with silence. Her silence would be her defiance. Her silence would say everything that needed to be said. Her mother's voice cut through the room again, harsh and unforgiving. "How could you disgrace us like this?" Genevieve spat, her face twisted in disgust. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just sat there, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. Her silence was a statement in itself, a statement that said she was no longer seeking their validation. She had long since stopped needing it. Isabella, sitting beside their mother, shook her head slowly, her lips curling into a smile that was anything but kind. "You really think you can just walk in here and expect to be treated like one of us?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're not part of this family, Maya. You never were." Maya's breath caught in her throat at the venom in Isabella's words, but she refused to let it show. The pain was there, of course. The sting of being rejected by her own blood was a wound that would never fully heal, but Maya had learned long ago that family was not always a safe place. Sometimes it was just a cage, a trap that kept you from becoming who you were meant to be. And as she sat in that courtroom, facing her family's contempt, she realized that she had outgrown them. They no longer had the power to define her. The more they spoke, the more their words seemed to lose their impact. Maya could feel the sharpness of her mother's insults, but they didn't cut as deeply as they once had. The years of hurt, of being treated as less than, had built something inside her. Something stronger than the love she had once hoped for. It was a resolve, a quiet strength that came from within. And in that silence, she found her voice. The judge, sitting quietly at the front, cleared his throat and called for order. The noise in the room seemed to fade into the background as Maya remained still, her eyes locked on the front of the courtroom. The world around her felt distant, almost surreal, as if she were no longer a part of it. She could feel the weight of her family's eyes on her, but she refused to meet their gaze. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, even in the face of everything they had thrown at her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Maya could hear the soft murmur of the gallery, the whispers of her family's friends, but she didn't care. They could talk, they could judge her. But it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't here for them. She was here for herself. As the proceedings continued, Maya remained silent, her face a mask of calm. She would not respond to their cruelty. She would not let them see the effect their words had on her. They had made their judgment long ago, and nothing she did could change that. But what they didn't know was that they had already lost. They had already given her the one thing she needed to move on, the knowledge that she was strong enough to walk away from their rejection without looking back. Maya's mind drifted back to a time long before the courtroom and the cold indifference of her family. It was a time when the wounds of rejection began to take root, when she was just a young girl, still full of hope and naive belief that one day her family would see her for who she truly was. But those days were long gone, buried beneath years of hurt, disappointment, and a deep sense of abandonment. The memories flooded her mind like an unwelcome tide. She remembered the first time she had truly defied her father, the man who had once been her hero. She was 17, sitting across from him in his study, the smell of cigar smoke thick in the air as he sat behind his desk, a war hero's pride in every wrinkle of his face. Maya had just returned from a visit to a military recruitment office, the dream of following in her father's footsteps burning fiercely within her. But her father's reaction was nothing like she had expected. "You want to join the army?" he had said, his voice low, controlled, but with an edge of disbelief. "You want to throw away everything we've built, everything I've worked for?" His eyes, once warm with pride, whenever she would show him her grades or talk about her dreams, now turned to stone. Maya had tried to explain, tried to tell him that it wasn't about throwing anything away, but about standing on her own, proving that she could do something meaningful. But he wouldn't hear it. In a swift, unexpected motion, he had slapped her hard across the face, the sting of it far deeper than the physical pain. It wasn't just the slap, it was the look in his eyes, the disappointment, the fury, the finality. "I'd rather have no daughter at all than one who humiliates me in front of my colleagues," he had growled, his voice thick with contempt. "Don't ever speak to me about this again." Maya's hand had instinctively reached up to her cheek, but it wasn't the pain that lingered, it was the words, the finality of them. In that moment, she had realized that she would never be good enough for him. No matter what she did, she would always fall short in his eyes. But what hurt even more was her mother's silence. Genevieve had been sitting across the room, her hands clasped neatly in her lap, not a word of protest escaping her lips. She had watched the whole thing unfold, her eyes never leaving the scene. Maya had pleaded with her mother, silently, in that moment, to speak up, to defend her, but Genevieve had remained quiet. Her indifference was like a cold wind that froze Maya to the core. Her mother's silence was a message in itself. "You're on your own." The years that followed were marked by that same sense of isolation. Maya tried harder and harder to prove her worth, to make her father proud, but every effort was met with cold dismissal. When she excelled in school, it was never enough. When she tried out for the local track team and won medals, her father barely acknowledged her victories. Instead, he would boast about Isabella's accomplishments, her perfect grades, her flawless appearance. It was as if Maya's achievements were just shadows compared to the golden light that seemed to shine on her sister. Isabella had always been the family's pride and joy. She had never strayed from the path laid out for her. Perfect grades, perfect looks, perfect manners. Everything about Isabella was polished, pristine. And Maya? Maya was the wild one, the one who didn't fit in, the one who preferred jeans over dresses, who spent her weekends working on engines rather than attending high society teas. In her mother's eyes, Maya's rough edges, her independence, her desire to forge her own path, made her a stain on the Harris name, and Isabella, her perfect sister, was always there to remind her of it. Maya could still remember the biting comments, the cold sneers, and the subtle ways Isabella would make her feel inferior. "You'll never belong here," Isabella would say, her voice sweet and polite, but laced with poison. "This family is for people who know how to behave, Maya, not for rebels." The contrast between the two of them couldn't have been more stark. While Isabella was praised, adored, and showered with affection, Maya was left to find validation elsewhere. The boys in school who would laugh and pat her on the back when she fixed a broken-down car. The teachers who would offer a smile of encouragement when she spoke up in class. They were her only comfort. But it was never enough. The hole in her heart, the yearning for her family's love and acceptance, never went away. Every time she tried to bridge the gap between them, it only widened. She started to believe that maybe she wasn't meant to be part of the Harris family. Maybe, just maybe, they were right to see her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. But what she hadn't realized then was that they didn't define her. They couldn't. She wasn't just their daughter or their sister. She was Maya Harris, a soldier who had fought battles that had nothing to do with family expectations and everything to do with survival. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their love. As Maya sat in that courtroom now, the memories felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating her with their weight. But she wasn't going to let them crush her. She wasn't going to let the years of rejection define her anymore. She had made it this far without their support, and she would continue without it. The battlefield she had fought on, both in the military and in her personal life, had taught her one thing: silence was her power. And today she would wield it with unyielding strength. Maya never joined the military to make her family proud. If anything, she had long since given up on the idea that anything she did would ever be enough to meet their expectations. No, she joined the army because she needed something more than the rejection, more than the endless weight of being treated like an outsider in her own home. The army, she thought, might give her the one thing her family never could: respect. From the moment she stepped into boot camp, Maya felt the shift. She was no longer just a daughter of the Harris family, someone defined by her last name and her father's name. In the army, she wasn't anyone's disappointment or failure. She was simply another soldier, and that felt like freedom. At first it was overwhelming, the drills, the long hours, the physical exhaustion that seemed to never end. But as the days went on, something clicked inside of her. Here in the barracks, amidst the sweat, the grit, and the constant noise, Maya found a sense of belonging. She was no longer just Maya Harris, the girl who was too different for her family. She was Maya, the soldier, the medic, the one who would not stop until her mission was completed, no matter how hard the road ahead seemed. Her peers didn't care about her last name. They didn't care about the medals her father had earned or the socialite status her mother flaunted. They didn't see her as the wild magnolia her mother had described her as. They saw her as one of them, a fellow soldier. It was a strange feeling, the first time someone looked at her with respect for the work she put in, rather than the name she carried. She'd spent years fighting for approval from people who had never really seen her, and now here she was, fighting for something else entirely. The respect that came from hard work, sacrifice, and commitment. It didn't come from family, but it was still real, still worth something. The first time she truly felt like she belonged was on a grueling ruck march. She was part of a team carrying heavy gear over treacherous terrain, and the weight of the pack felt like 1,000 pounds on her back. Her legs screamed for relief, and the cold air cut through her uniform. But it wasn't the pain that made her pause. It was the steady, supportive voices of her fellow soldiers urging her on. "You've got this, Maya. Keep pushing," one of the guys called out, his voice hoarse but encouraging. She had never heard that kind of support from her family, not in the way that mattered. The army had a way of stripping down all the pretenses, all the facades people built for themselves in the outside world. Here, it didn't matter who your parents were or what kind of legacy you came from. All that mattered was what you could contribute to the team. It was in moments like those that Maya realized what she had truly been searching for: acceptance. Not the hollow kind that came with the superficial praise of her family, but the deep, earned respect of those who saw her for who she really was: a fighter, a survivor, and a dedicated member of a team. But as much as she had found that sense of purpose, there was still the underlying feeling of isolation. She wasn't surrounded by the comforts of her home or the people she had once hoped would understand her. She was in a foreign world, a world where the rules were different, the expectations were different, and the stakes were much higher. Despite the camaraderie she had with her fellow soldiers, a part of her still felt the weight of loneliness. There were nights when she would lie in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about her family, her parents, and the life she had left behind. She wondered if they ever thought about her, if they ever regretted pushing her away. She thought about the way her father had slapped her, how her mother had never stood up for her. Those memories still haunted her, but she didn't let them consume her. She couldn't afford to. In the army, Maya learned to bury those emotions, to push through the pain, and to focus on the mission at hand. The military had taught her to be tough, to be disciplined, to be resilient. But it had also given her a strange sense of peace. Here, she didn't have to be anyone's idea of who she should be. She didn't have to carry the weight of her family's expectations on her shoulders anymore. As she advanced in her training and began her first deployment, the feeling of being disconnected from her family remained, but it didn't matter as much. She was finally standing on her own 2 feet. She wasn't a disappointment anymore. She was a combat medic, trusted by her team, valued by those who depended on her skills and expertise. In the chaos of war, in the heat of battle, Maya had found a sense of purpose she had never been able to find at home. Still, there were days when the silence of her family's absence felt like a gaping hole in her chest. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was the one who had failed. Her family had failed her long ago by failing to see her for who she truly was, and now she had built something for herself, something that couldn't be taken away by their rejection. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Maya sat with her back straight, hands resting flat on her lap, her fingers tense but composed. She had already been through worse. She had stood in the heat of battle, facing down enemies that wanted her dead. And yet, sitting in this cold courtroom, she felt a different kind of fear. The fear of being stripped bare, of having her very soul picked apart by the family that had already rejected her. The attorney for her sister Isabella, a slick man named Sterling Chase, had just finished his opening remarks. He was a master at playing to the gallery, his words smooth and confident, each sentence designed to manipulate the jury's perception. Maya could already feel the eyes of the room shift, the whispers from the gallery as they absorbed the carefully crafted narrative that was about to unfold. Sterling's voice rose in volume, and Maya could feel his eyes flicker to her as he began to lay out the supposed facts of the case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, "we are here today because Captain Maya Harris, despite her military accolades, has shown a complete disregard for medical ethics. As a combat medic, she was entrusted with the care of her father, General Harrison Thorne, during his final days in the hospital. But what Maya failed to mention, and what we have evidence to prove, is that she took liberties with his care, liberties that endangered his life. Maya's jaw clenched as he continued, her blood starting to boil. He was painting her as a villain, turning her every act of compassion into something sinister, manipulating her care for her father into a crime. But she would not respond. She would not speak. She would sit there, in silence, like she always had. Then, as if he had been waiting for the perfect moment, Sterling hit her with the next blow. On the screen behind him, a grainy image flashed up. It was a photo of Maya adjusting her father's IV line, her face intent on her work. The picture had been taken from an angle that made it look as though she was doing something far worse, something far more malicious. A smear campaign at its finest. "This photo," Sterling said, pointing at the screen with a flourish, "was taken by an anonymous source. It clearly shows Captain Harris in the act of administering what can only be described as unauthorized medical intervention." His voice dripped with contempt. "And as you can see from the concerned look on the faces of the hospital staff who were present, her actions were not just unapproved but dangerous. This is a clear violation of medical protocols, and it could have cost General Thorne his life." The image lingered on the screen, a twisted version of reality, and Maya felt her stomach twist. She knew the truth. She had simply been adjusting an IV line, something any medic would do without a second thought. It wasn't the first time she'd done it, and it wouldn't be the last. But here, in this courtroom, her every action was being questioned, being twisted into something that could ruin her. "Now," Sterling continued, his voice laced with mock sympathy, "we are left to wonder, was this an act of negligence or was it something more?" He turned to the jury, letting his question hang in the air like a dagger. Maya's heart raced. The gallery was silent now, hanging on every word. The weight of their gazes, of their judgment, was suffocating. She knew her family was watching from the other side of the room, and she could feel their eyes on her. They were just as complicit in this attack as Sterling. They had all turned against her, and now they were using her father's sickness as a weapon to tear her down even further. She glanced briefly toward her mother, Genevieve, who was sitting stiffly, her face a mask of cold disapproval. Maya knew that her mother, the one who had never lifted a finger to protect her, was the one who had orchestrated this attack. She could see it in her eyes, the glint of satisfaction as Maya was dragged through the mud once again. And yet, despite the agony of it all, Maya did not speak. She would not speak. The silence was louder than anything she could say. It was more powerful than any rebuttal, more defiant than any angry words she could throw back at them. Maya's eyes flicked to her sister Isabella. Isabella's face was perfectly composed, her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching Maya squirm. She had always relished in her sister's downfall, the way she could manipulate her to make her feel small, to make her feel less than. Maya's heart ached, but she refused to let it show. She didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. They wanted her to break, wanted her to get angry, wanted her to lash out so they could call her unstable, a danger to the family. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Her silence was her rebellion. The tension in the courtroom continued to build. Sterling was relentless, but Maya held firm. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Maya could feel the eyes of the jury on her, but she kept her gaze ahead, never faltering, never breaking. As the minutes dragged on, the room seemed to shift. It was no longer a place of judgment. It was a battleground. Maya wasn't just fighting for her name, for her reputation, for her family's approval. She was fighting for her soul, for the truth. And in that moment, the truth was clear. Her silence wasn't weakness, it wasn't submission, it was power. Maya was stronger than they knew, stronger than they could ever understand, and she would never let them take that from her. Maya's mind raced as the courtroom buzzed around her. The words of her sister, of Sterling, kept echoing in her mind. They had done it. They had twisted her actions, manipulated the truth, and now they were trying to tear her down. The attacks on her character, on her very worth, were relentless. But as much as she wanted to lash out, as much as she wanted to scream, she knew that would only give them what they wanted. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She wouldn't let them win. Instead, her mind took her back, far away from the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom, back to her childhood. The years she spent fighting for something she could never grasp, the acceptance of a family who had never truly seen her. Maya remembered the countless times she had tried to prove herself to her mother and sister, trying to be enough, trying to earn their love. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. Her mother's cold indifference, her sister's biting comments, they were all she had ever known. They saw her as a failure, as a disappointment. To them, she was nothing more than an outsider in her own family. She could still hear the words that her mother had said, the ones that had cut deeper than anything physical. "You've ruined this family. I never wanted a daughter like you." The sting of those words had stayed with her like a wound that never quite healed. But there was something else, something that had always been with her too. A quiet, unwavering voice deep inside her that told her she was more than what they said. That voice had been the one thing that kept her going, even when everything else seemed to fall apart. Maya closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she allowed herself to remember the military. She remembered the day she had stepped into the army, her heart pounding in her chest as she faced the unknown. It had been her escape, her chance to prove that she was capable of something more. There, among the other soldiers, no one cared about her family name, about her past, about the expectations that had been placed on her. They saw her for who she was, Maya, the medic, the soldier, the one who fought for the lives of others. She had worked tirelessly, trained harder than anyone, and in the end she had earned the respect of her comrades. They saw her for what she had become, not for who she was born to be. Maya had never fought for her family's approval. She had fought for herself. She had earned every achievement, every victory with blood, sweat, and tears. And none of it had been witnessed by the people who mattered most to her. Her mother and sister had never been there to see her succeed. They had never been there to see her fight, to see her courage. All they saw was a girl who had chosen a path they couldn't understand, and they had rejected her for it. As the memories of those days washed over her, Maya's grip on the armrest tightened. The courtroom was still buzzing with conversation, but to her it felt distant now. It felt like she was floating above it all, watching from afar. The years of rejection, the pain, the hurt, it all seemed so small in comparison to what she had overcome. But even as her anger and frustration swirled inside her, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let it control her. She couldn't let it take away the strength she had built. Maya knew that her family would never see her for what she truly was. They would never understand the sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought, not just in the military, but in her own life. They would never acknowledge the strength it had taken to leave their world behind and carve out a new life for herself. But she didn't need their validation anymore. She didn't need their approval. Her eyes snapped back to the courtroom as she heard Sterling's voice once again. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, the testimony of Captain Harris's own words. In an email to a nurse, she states, "I'm the only one who cares whether he lives or dies." These words are concerning. They suggest emotional instability, a dangerous mindset. We can't ignore the possibility that this could have affected her judgment when it came to her father's care. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. She remembered that email. It had been written out of frustration, a cry for help when she felt utterly alone. But Sterling had twisted it, turned it into something it was never meant to be. He had taken the raw emotion of that moment and used it to paint her as unstable. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. The one time she had dared to express her pain, it was now being used against her. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wave of anger pass through her. She would not let this break her. She would not let their lies define her. The truth was simple, but it didn't need to be spoken. Her silence, the strength in her stillness, was enough. It was louder than any defense she could offer, stronger than any argument she could make. The moment passed, and when Maya opened her eyes again, she was ready. She would not fight with words. She would fight with the one thing they could never take from her, her dignity. Her silence was her rebellion. It was the one thing she could control in a world where everything else seemed to be slipping away. And so, as the court continued to spin its web of lies, Maya sat there, unmoving, unflinching, a silent testament to the truth that lived inside her. They could try to break her, to destroy her, but they would never succeed. She was Maya Harris, and no one, not her family, not anyone, could ever take away the strength she had earned. The courtroom was thick with tension as Sterling finished his latest attack. The whispers in the gallery were louder now, like a wave crashing against a shore. Maya felt their judgment, felt the weight of every word Sterling had thrown at her, and yet she remained still. Her face was expressionless, betraying no emotion as the lawyer painted her as unstable, a danger to her own father. But just as the weight of the accusations seemed unbearable, something unexpected happened. General Vance, a man of reputation in the military, stood up at the back of the room. His presence was commanding, even without speaking. With a steady and deliberate pace, he walked toward the front of the room, his eyes locked on the judge, a sense of quiet authority radiating from him. The murmur in the courtroom grew softer, and for the first time in hours, Maya felt the collective breath of the room hold. "Your Honor," General Vance's voice was steady, low, but unmistakable. "With respect, I request to testify." Sterling's face immediately darkened as he shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We have not been notified of any such testimony, and—" The judge, a man who had seen his fair share of legal battles, held up a hand to silence Sterling. "Let him speak," the judge said, his voice calm but firm. General Vance turned his gaze to Maya, and she felt an unexpected surge of emotion in her chest. There was respect there, something she had not seen in her own family's eyes. In his, there was understanding, recognition, something she had longed for her entire life. "I've served with Captain Maya Harris in battle," General Vance began, his voice steady as he addressed the court. "In 2017, during an operation in Al-Qadi, our convoy was ambushed. We lost our communications and had casualties. I was hit by an RPG. It was Maya who pulled me out of the line of fire, carried me through hell, and saved my life." The words hung in the air, each one cutting through the silence like a blade. Maya felt the eyes of the court shift to her, some filled with surprise, others with skepticism. But General Vance didn't pause. He continued. "She didn't hesitate. She wasn't thinking about the danger. She was thinking about getting me to safety, about saving me and the men who were still alive," he said. "I was bleeding out. My femoral artery was severed. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here. She didn't stop there. She went back to the fight, carried out a rescue mission, and made sure every last man who could be saved was." Maya's breath hitched in her chest. Her hands clenched in her lap, but she didn't look away. She knew it was true, every word. She had done it because it was what needed to be done. It wasn't for recognition or glory. It was for the men and women who fought alongside her, for the ones who relied on her. She had made a promise to never leave a fallen comrade behind, no matter the cost. General Vance's words were a lifeline, a breath of fresh air after the suffocating weight of the accusations. But as much as they resonated with Maya, she knew the battle wasn't over. Her family was still there, still watching from the other side of the courtroom, still clinging to their refusal to acknowledge who she had become. Sterling, recovering from the shock of the testimony, sneered. "General, we appreciate your service, but your testimony is irrelevant. This court is not concerned with battlefields. It is concerned with what Captain Harris did here at home with her father, and that is the real question at hand." General Vance didn't flinch at the challenge. Your Honour, I am here to speak on behalf of the character of Captain Maya Harris. She is not just some soldier with a medal. She is a leader, a hero, someone who has earned her place in the military and in this world. If you want to understand what she did, look to her actions, not the lies you've heard from others.
The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment it felt as though time had stopped. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, but she didn't dare break the stillness. She was a soldier, yes, but more than that, she was a woman who had earned her place, her respect, the respect she had fought so hard for. But as the courtroom sat in stunned silence, Maya's gaze flicked over to her family. Her mother's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together in a thin line. Isabella's expression was cold, unmoving. They weren't looking at General Vance. They weren't listening to him. They were too busy holding on to the narrative they had created about her, the one they had clung to for so long. Maya felt her stomach tighten. It was like a familiar ache in her chest, one she had felt countless times before, the weight of rejection from the people she once hoped would love her unconditionally. But this time it wasn't just about them. This time she wasn't fighting for their approval, she was fighting for something greater, her truth. The truth that she had spent her entire life trying to hide, trying to ignore, but that was now being revealed to the world. She was more than just the disappointment they had made her out to be. Despite the sting of their refusal to see her, to accept her for who she had become, Maya knew one thing for sure. She had earned her place in this world, and no matter how hard they tried to drag her back into their lies, she wouldn't go. She was no longer their bastard child. She was a warrior, and she would prove it no matter what. The air in the courtroom was thick with disbelief, a silence so profound that it seemed to swallow everything around it. General Vance had just dropped a bombshell, one that Maya had not expected, and the room was now hanging on every word he had spoken. As he had finished recounting the moment of her bravery in battle, he had continued without hesitation, revealing a truth that no one, least of all Maya, was prepared for. "And there is one more thing," Vance had said, his voice unwavering. "I've kept this information to myself for a long time, but it's time the truth came to light. In 2017, General Harrison Thorne, Maya's father, submitted a nomination for her to receive the Medal of Honor. He signed it himself, and it was his decision. But despite her heroism, despite what she had done on that battlefield, the nomination was never submitted to the Pentagon. It was kept in a drawer, hidden away, because he feared the media attention it would bring. He feared it would hurt the family's reputation." Maya's breath caught in her throat, and the courtroom seemed to pulse with the force of the revelation. The walls felt as if they were closing in on her, and for a moment the words that had just been spoken hung in the air like smoke. Her father, the man who had told her she was a disappointment, the man who had turned his back on her, had secretly recognized her worth, and yet he had hidden it away, too afraid to let the world know. Maya's gaze flicked to the front of the courtroom where her family sat. Her mother, Genevieve, seemed to shrink into her seat, her fingers clutching the edge of the table as if she were holding on for dear life. Isabella, who had always been so composed, so sure of herself, now looked pale, her face drawn tight with shock. Neither of them had known. They had no idea that their father had done something so monumental, something that Maya herself had never known. Her heart sank. For all the pain her family had caused her, for all the rejection she had faced from the people who should have loved her unconditionally, this felt like a betrayal of a different kind. Her father had seen her for who she truly was, not the failure they had labelled her as, but a woman worthy of the highest honour in the military. But he had never given her that recognition. He had kept it hidden, locked away, because he feared what it might do to their perfect family image. "Why?" Maya whispered under her breath, the words meant for no one but herself. Why had he done it? Why had he hidden this from her? For years, Maya had felt as though she were invisible to her family. They had never seen her, not truly. She had fought for every inch of respect she could get from the world, but the one place where it should have come easily, from her own blood, had always been the hardest to win.
She had long since come to terms with the fact that her family didn't understand her. But now, hearing this, she realized that her father had, in his own way, understood. He had seen her bravery, her sacrifice, but he had kept it in the dark, unable to give her the validation she had so desperately needed. It was the most painful part of all. As the truth settled in, Maya felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The tears she had long since locked away began to claw at the surface. The truth was raw, jagged, and too much to bear. Her father had loved her. He had seen her worth. But his fear of what others would think, his obsession with the family's reputation, had kept him from ever acknowledging it, from ever telling her how proud he was of her. She looked at General Vance, his expression softening as he spoke. "I'm not here to take away from the Thorne family's legacy, but this isn't about legacy. This is about truth. This is about Maya Harris and what she did, what she deserves. Her father saw it, and I believe the rest of the world should see it too." Maya didn't know what to say. The room around her blurred as her thoughts swirled.
It wasn't just the injustice of it all. It was the realization that she had been carrying the burden of not being enough for her family for so long, and now, with this revelation, she understood that her father had never wanted her to feel that way. He had never wanted her to be invisible. But he had kept the truth from her, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything else. Sterling, ever the opportunist, wasted no time in trying to undermine the weight of Vance's testimony. "Your Honour," he interrupted, "this is a convenient story to tell, but it's irrelevant to the matter at hand. A nomination for a medal does not erase the actions in question. We are still dealing with the fact that Captain Harris acted without authority. The truth of this is still in question." Maya turned her gaze to her family again. Genevieve and Isabella hadn't said a word, but their faces betrayed everything.
Genevieve's eyes were wide with shock, and Isabella's lips were pressed tight, as if holding back some emotion she couldn't quite control. They didn't know. They hadn't known about the nomination. And now, as the truth began to unfold, Maya realized that this revelation would change everything. But what did it change? Would they see her now? Would they finally understand who she had become, who she had always been? Or would they continue to ignore the truth, to bury it under their own shame, their own denial? Maya's heart felt heavy, but she refused to let it break. She would not be defined by their rejection. She had already earned her place in the world. Whether her family recognized it or not didn't matter anymore. As she sat there in the courtroom, with the truth hanging in the air, Maya made a choice. She would no longer fight for their approval. She didn't need it. The world knew who she was now, and that was all that mattered. The judge's gavel rang through the silence of the courtroom, signalling the end of a long, drawn-out battle. Maya had won. The ruling was clear. The estate, everything her father had left behind, would be hers. She had fought for this moment, not just for the material inheritance, but for the recognition of the truth that had been buried for so long, the truth of who she was, of what she had done, and what she had earned. But as the decision was read aloud, Maya felt no elation, no triumph surged through her. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness, a sense of finality that settled deep in her chest. She had won the case, but she had lost something far more important along the way: her family. The very people she had fought so hard to gain approval from had never truly seen her. No ruling, no victory could change that. As the courtroom began to empty, Maya sat there for a moment longer, processing the weight of the verdict. It wasn't just about the house or the wealth. It was about the rejection she had endured for her entire life, and in this moment it felt like that rejection had been solidified. Her mother and sister hadn't changed. They had never truly accepted her, and no amount of legal victories would change that. Maya stood up slowly, her movements deliberate, as if to make sure she was steady. Her boots clicked softly on the floor as she walked towards the exit, her gaze unwavering. but as she passed by the table where her mother and sister sat, her mother's sharp voice cut through the air like a knife to the heart. "You don't deserve this," Genevieve spat, her voice thick with fury. "You think a piece of paper makes you worthy of what your father left behind? You're not fit to inherit anything." Maya didn't stop. She didn't look at her mother. She couldn't bring herself to. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the venom that Genevieve injected into every syllable. It was the same venom she had always used to control Maya, to make her feel small and insignificant. But today, Maya was done. Done with the manipulation, done with the hurtful words, done with the endless quest for validation from people who would never see her for who she truly was. Isabella, sitting beside their mother, didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her eyes were all she needed. The cold, detached look in her gaze made it clear that nothing had changed. She still didn't see Maya, still didn't want to. Maya had always known that Isabella had never seen her as an equal. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who was always in favour with their mother. Maya was just the thorn in the family's side. Maya didn't care. She refused to let their indifference affect her anymore. She had spent too many years seeking their approval, trying to be someone she wasn't, just to fit into their narrow view of what was acceptable. And now, as she stood there, on the cusp of victory, she realized that the approval she had been chasing was never going to come. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, the anger she had once felt fading into something quieter, something more resolute. The victory wasn't in the inheritance. It was in the realization that she had nothing left to prove to them. She had already proven everything that mattered. As she reached the door, she glanced back, just for a moment, to catch the look on her mother's face. Genevieve's expression was one of pure hatred, her jaw clenched as if the mere sight of Maya was too much to bear. Isabella, on the other hand, was coldly composed, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Maya could feel the weight of their disapproval, but it no longer affected her the way it once had. She had spent so long letting their rejection define her, and now she was free from it. Maya stepped out of the courtroom into the bright, blinding light of the outside world. The weight of the decision still lingered, but now it was something she could bear. She didn't need them to acknowledge her victory. She didn't need them to accept her. She was standing on her own, and that was enough. Later that evening, as Maya sat in her small apartment, staring out the window at the lights of the city, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought her to this point. The years of rejection, the battles fought in the courtroom, and the constant feeling of being an outsider in her own family. She had won the case, but in the end she knew that the true victory was in her independence, her ability to walk away from the toxic relationships that had held her back for so long. She reached for the framed photo of her father that had sat on her desk for years. In it, he was smiling, his arm around her shoulder, the two of them standing together as a family. It had been taken before everything had gone wrong, before she had been cast aside. She looked at the photo for a long time, her emotions a tangle of bitterness and longing. But she didn't let it consume her. She had made peace with the fact that her father had never been able to show her the love she had craved. But that didn't mean she couldn't love herself. And that was enough. With a deep breath, Maya put the photo back on the desk, and for the first time in years, she smiled to herself. She had earned this moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The days following the trial were a blur for Maya. She had won. The court had ruled in her favour, giving her not only the estate that her father had left behind, but also the validation she had fought so long to achieve. Yet as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, alone with her thoughts, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was no overwhelming sense of triumph, no joy that came with the victory. Instead, there was an odd emptiness, a sense of stillness that settled deep inside her. She had imagined that the moment she won, everything would change. She had expected a flood of relief. of satisfaction, that she had finally earned her place, that she had finally won her family's approval. But instead what she felt was a quiet calm. The battle in some ways had taken everything from her. The years of yearning for acceptance, the heartache of being abandoned, the constant fight to prove her worth, it all seemed like a lifetime ago, and now the victory felt hollow. It wasn't the estate that Maya cared about, it wasn't the house or the money that mattered. What she had truly fought for, what had always mattered to her, was something far more intangible. She had fought to be seen, to be recognized, to prove that she was worthy. But in the end, her family had remained the same. They had never truly seen her for who she was.
Genevieve's cold disapproval and Isabella's distant indifference hadn't changed, no matter what the court had decided. The weight of that realization settled on her like a stone. Winning the case had been a step toward reclaiming her own identity, but it had not healed the wound her family had inflicted on her so many years ago. Maya knew that the real victory, the one that truly mattered, had to come from within herself. She stood up and walked over to the small window in her apartment, looking out at the city below. The skyline stretched before her, tall and distant, like her own journey. It was a journey she had walked alone, a journey that had taken her from the cold, heartless walls of her family's house to the warmth of her own self-reliance. In the silence of that moment, Maya knew she had already won. She had won her independence, her freedom from the expectations that had bound her for so long. But there was still one decision she had to make, a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. The victory had given her the opportunity to return to the life she had left behind, to step back into the family's world and claim her place at the table. The estate was hers now, and with it she could return to Savannah, to the mansion where she had once felt invisible, and take her place as an heir. It was her right, but the thought of it made her stomach turn. Maya turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the framed photo of her father. It had been taken when she was a little girl, before everything had gone wrong. In the picture, her father had his arm around her, smiling down at her with pride. The photo had always been a reminder of the man she had wanted him to be, the father who would stand by her side, who would protect her, who would love her. But now, looking at it, Maya felt a strange sense of finality. Her father had never been able to show her the love she had craved. His rejection had been a wound that had never healed. But the truth she had discovered, the fact that he had secretly nominated her for the Medal of Honor, that he had recognized her worth, had given her something she hadn't known she needed. She had wanted to be seen by him, to be acknowledged, and in the end she had received that acknowledgement. But it had come too late, and no medal, no inheritance, no family name could undo the years of pain she had suffered. Maya sat back down at the small kitchen table, the weight of the decision heavy in her hands. She could go back. She could return to the mansion, take the inheritance, and finally prove to her family that she had been worthy all along. But that would mean stepping back into the same world that had rejected her, the same world that had always seen her as an outsider. She would always be the one who didn't belong. And for what? To have her mother's cold stare and her sister's indifferent smile? To pretend that everything was okay when it never had been? No, Maya realized. She had fought too hard for her freedom, too hard to escape their suffocating grasp. She couldn't go back. Not now, not after everything she had fought for. She had found her own worth. She had found her peace. She had discovered that the validation she had sought for so long could only come from within herself. Maya had fought for respect, for recognition, for love. But in the end, she had learned that the only person who truly needed to see her worth was herself. Maya made her decision. She wouldn't go back to Savannah. She wouldn't return to the mansion, to the family that had never really accepted her. The house was hers now, but it was just a building. What mattered was the life she had built for herself, the freedom she had gained, and the woman she had become. She had already found the one thing she needed, herself. With a deep breath, Maya stood up and walked to the door.
She was ready to leave behind the past, to step into the future that was waiting for her. The weight of the past, the pain of rejection, was no longer hers to carry. She was free. Maya had barely begun to settle into her new life when the phone call came. It was a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Paige, it's me," Isabella's voice said, as if nothing had changed. There was an odd sweetness in it, a forced calmness that Maya didn't buy for a second. "I know things have been rough between us, but I think it's time we put all of that behind us. There's a fundraiser at the club this weekend, and I'd love for you to come. It's a chance for you to show everyone that we're still a family, that you haven't forgotten who you are." Maya's grip tightened on the phone, and for a moment she could feel the anger rising in her chest. The audacity of Isabella to call her like this, to act as though nothing had ever happened, was almost too much to bear. The nerve to suggest that Maya return to the very family that had rejected her, that had torn her down for years, was appalling. She took a deep breath, letting the calmness she had worked so hard to build wash over her. She would not react in anger. She would not give in to the frustration she was feeling. "No, Isabella," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not going back. I'm not going to pretend that everything is okay just because you want it to be. You and Mum made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't welcome in your world, and I'm not interested in rejoining it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Maya could almost feel Isabella's shock through the silence. She had always been the golden child, the one who was adored and revered by their mother, the one who never had to fight for approval. And now for the first time Maya was telling her no. "But, Maya, we're family." Isabella's voice came back, softer now, tinged with something Maya couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Regret? "You can't just walk away from everything we've built. Mum, she's been upset about everything. She's not handling it well, but this is still your legacy. You're part of it." "No," Maya said firmly. "You don't get to decide what's part of me anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to fit into a family that never really accepted me. But I'm done with that. I'm done pretending that I belong when all I've ever felt is like an outsider." She could hear Isabella exhale sharply, but Maya didn't give her the chance to say anything else. She ended the call, her finger pressing firmly on the red button, and a wave of relief washed over her. It felt good. It felt like the final severing of ties that had bound her to a past that no longer served her. Maya was free. And as she put her phone down on the kitchen counter, she knew she had made the right choice. She had been given a second chance at life, a life that was entirely her own. The past didn't have to define her anymore. She didn't have to seek approval from a family that had never truly seen her for who she was. She had already earned that recognition from herself. It wasn't long after the call ended that Maya decided to start building the life she had always wanted. She had been so focused on fighting for her place in the world, so determined to prove herself to others, that she had forgotten to live for herself. Now she had the opportunity to do just that. Maya joined a local community centre, volunteering her time with veterans and people who had struggled with their own battles. She met people who, like her, had been lost, misunderstood, or pushed aside. They didn't care about her last name or her past. They only cared about the person she was now. In their eyes, she was just Maya, the woman who cared, who gave, who fought for something more. Her work with the veterans was fulfilling, but it also offered something else, a chance for Maya to heal. She spent her days helping others, sharing her story, and in doing so she began to find peace with her own. There was something cathartic about giving to others, about seeing the impact of her work, something that gave her a sense of purpose she had long craved. But the real gift was the people she met along the way. She formed friendships with others who had fought their own wars, and it was in those connections that Maya found a new sense of belonging. No longer did she feel like an outsider. She was part of a new family, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experience. In the quiet moments, Maya would reflect on how far she had come. She no longer needed the approval of her mother, her sister, or anyone else.
She had built something stronger, a life that was hers, defined not by what she lacked, but by what she had gained: self-respect, the love of true friends, and the peace that came with knowing she had done the best she could, regardless of what anyone else thought. Her days were no longer spent chasing validation from a family that would never accept her for who she was. Instead, they were filled with meaning, with purpose, and with the kind of love that could never be taken away by rejection or betrayal. Maya had found her peace, and for the first time in her life, she knew that it was enough. Maya spent the next few weeks in a kind of quiet reflection, trying to piece together the broken fragments of her past and heal the wounds that had long festered. The work at the community centre kept her busy, and the people she had met there became a source of comfort and understanding.
But in the stillness of her apartment, away from the distractions of helping others, the silence was deafening. It was in these moments that she allowed herself to think about everything: the rejection, the pain, the years of feeling unworthy. There had been a time when she had believed that her worth was tied to her family's approval. She had spent so many years chasing after their love, their acknowledgement, only to realize, after all this time, that it would never come. Her mother and sister had made it clear that Maya would never be enough for them. And no matter how hard she tried to fit into their mold, she had always been the one who didn't belong. At first, the realization had hurt. It had cut deep, leaving a raw, open wound that took time to heal. She had spent so long trying to please them, to be the daughter they wanted her to be, only to realize that nothing she did would ever be good enough in their eyes.
But over time, she began to understand that their rejection didn't define her. Their inability to see her for who she truly was didn't make her any less of a person. It simply meant that they were incapable of accepting the person she had become. Maya took a long, hard look at herself in the mirror one evening. For the first time in years, she really saw herself. The woman who had fought battles both on and off the battlefield. The woman who had endured rejection and still stood strong. She wasn't the broken girl her family had tried to make her. She was a survivor. She was someone who had learned to fight for herself, to value herself, even when no one else did. She could feel the weight of her past lifting piece by piece as she allowed herself to finally forgive the person who had held on to the pain the longest, herself. Maya had carried the burden of guilt and shame for far too long. She had blamed herself for everything, for not being the daughter her family wanted, for not being enough. But now she realized that none of it had been her fault. The pain had been a result of her family's inability to love her the way she needed to be loved. It was their failure, not hers. Maya closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, letting go of the years of resentment that had built up inside her. She had lived in the shadow of their expectations for too long. She had allowed their rejection to shape her sense of self-worth, to make her believe that she was unworthy of love and respect. But now she was letting all of that go. In the quiet of her apartment, Maya finally made the decision she had been avoiding for years. She would no longer live her life based on the approval of her family. She would no longer seek validation from people who had shown her time and time again that they could not accept her for who she was. She was going to live for herself, for the person she had become, not the person they had wanted her to be. The decision wasn't easy, and it didn't come without its struggles. There were moments when Maya still felt the pull of her past, when she longed for the acceptance that had always seemed just out of reach. But each time that longing crept up, she reminded herself that she didn't need them. She had already found her worth, and it wasn't tied to their approval. It was tied to her actions, her choices, her resilience. Maya began to take small steps toward creating a life that was hers and hers alone. She continued her work with the community centre, but she also began to carve out space for herself. She took up new hobbies, things she had always wanted to do but had never had the courage to try.
She started painting again, something she hadn't done since she was a child, and found solace in the process of creating something with her own hands. She spent time with her new friends, the people who accepted her without judgment, who saw her for who she truly was, not for the name she carried or the family she came from. These were the people who valued her not for her past, but for the person she was becoming. And slowly, over time, Maya started to believe in the life she was building. But it wasn't just about new friendships and new hobbies. It was about creating a new relationship with herself. Maya had always been her own harshest critic, always holding herself to impossible standards. But now she was learning to show herself kindness, to let go of the guilt that had haunted her for so long. She was learning to forgive herself, to accept that she wasn't perfect, but she was enough. The more she forgave herself, the lighter she felt. It was as if a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted, and she was free to be herself, unapologetically. Maya was no longer defined by the scars of her past or the rejection of her family. She was free to define herself on her own terms, and that was a freedom she had never known before. As the weeks passed, Maya began to feel the peace she had longed for. She no longer lived in the shadow of her family's expectations. She no longer sought their approval. She had found her own way, and it was enough. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was Maya Harris, and that was more than enough. Maya had always imagined that the moment she left her family behind, she would feel a sense of loss, a sense of something missing. But now, as she settled into her new life, she realized that the only thing she had truly left behind was the weight of her family's expectations, and that weight had been dragging her down for far too long. What she had gained in return was more precious than anything she could have imagined. The days now felt quieter, more peaceful. She had found a rhythm in her life that was hers alone, and she was beginning to enjoy the simple pleasures she had never allowed herself before. There were mornings spent walking along the riverfront, afternoons painting in her sunlit studio, and evenings laughing with the new friends she had made. Maya had found her balance in the chaos of the world, and for the first time she felt at home within herself. Her work with the community centre continued, and she threw herself into it with passion. Helping others had always been her calling, but now it felt more fulfilling than ever. She was surrounded by people who saw her for who she was, who appreciated her not for the family she came from, but for the work she did. It was a small but important shift. She had always been defined by her relationships with others, first with her family, then with her colleagues in the military. But now her sense of worth came from her own sense of self, from her ability to contribute to something greater than herself. But beyond her work, it was the peace of the evenings that truly gave her solace. Maya would sit in the quiet of her apartment, a cup of tea in her hands, and watch the sunset over the city. She wasn't looking for anything. She wasn't searching for approval or validation. She was simply living. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to be anything for anyone else. She wasn't seeking approval from the world. She was just Maya, and that was enough. As much as the victory in court had meant something to her, it had not been the thing that defined her. Yes, the house, the estate, they were hers, but the true victory, the real liberation, had come from freeing herself from the chains of her family's expectations. She didn't need their approval to feel complete anymore. She had built her life from the ground up, and it was hers, all hers. Maya thought back to the moments in the courtroom when she had felt the full weight of her family's rejection. She thought about her mother's cold stare, Isabella's detached indifference, and the bitter words they had thrown her way. They had tried to break her. They had tried to convince her that she wasn't enough, that she was nothing more than a disappointment. But they had failed. They had failed because they had underestimated her, because they had never seen her for who she truly was. For so many years, Maya had lived in the shadow of their judgment, constantly trying to win their approval. She had believed that if she could just prove her worth to them, everything would be okay. But now she realized that she didn't need them.
She didn't need their approval, their acceptance. She had built something far more valuable, her own sense of self-worth. Maya wasn't blind to the fact that her journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt, of loneliness. There would always be memories of the past, of the family she had left behind, haunting her in quiet moments. But those moments no longer held the power they once did. She had learned to face them, to confront the pain, and to move forward with the knowledge that she was strong enough to handle whatever came next. She was no longer defined by what her family thought of her, by their version of her story. She was the one who would write her own narrative now. And as she stood at the beginning of this new chapter, she was filled with a sense of hope and possibility she had never allowed herself to feel before. The world was wide open, and Maya was ready to embrace it. She spent the next few months working on her personal goals. She had always wanted to travel, to see the world beyond the confines of her small town. She took a solo trip to Europe, visiting cities she had only dreamed of, immersing herself in new cultures and discovering parts of herself she hadn't known were there. Each new experience added to the rich tapestry of her life, each moment further cementing her sense of independence and self-worth. But it wasn't just about travel or success. It was about living authentically, without the constraints of anyone else's expectations. She was free to make her own choices, to carve out a life that was true to who she was. And that was the greatest gift she could give herself. One evening, as Maya sat at a cafe in Paris, the sun setting behind the Eiffel Tower, she realized that the life she had imagined for herself, the one filled with acceptance, love, and approval, was not the life she had needed. What she had built was something even better, a life that was her own, a life built on the foundation of her own strength and resilience. And that, she realized, was the truest victory of all. The battle had been long, but in the end, Maya had found peace. She had freed herself from the chains of her past and built a future that was hers, filled with the promise of new beginnings and endless possibilities. The chapter with her family was closed, and the pages ahead were hers to fill. And as the lights of Paris twinkled in the distance, Maya smiled, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, at the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write with her own hand. As the months passed, Maya began to feel more at peace with the decisions she had made. The pain of the past, the years of rejection, had slowly faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of new beginnings. She had built a life for herself that was hers alone, and though it hadn't been easy, she had finally come to understand the true meaning of freedom. The freedom to live for herself, to choose her own path, and to no longer be shackled by the expectations and judgments of her family. One warm spring afternoon, as Maya sat on the balcony of her apartment, a thought crossed her mind, a simple yet profound thought that had been lingering in her heart for some time. She had not only created a new life for herself in the city, but she had also inherited the house where she had spent so many of her childhood years. The mansion, once a place of emptiness and rejection, now belonged to her. It was a symbol of her victory, her independence. But it was also a place of history, of memories, both painful and beautiful. She thought of the garden outside, the old magnolia tree that once stood tall in the yard, a reminder of her father's meticulous care. That tree had been taken down years ago after a violent storm, and the space it left behind had remained bare, much like the emotional void that had existed in her relationship with her family. But something stirred within her, a desire to reclaim that space, not as a reminder of what she had lost, but as a symbol of something new, something she could call her own. Maya decided that she would plant a new tree in that spot, not just any tree, but a jasmine plant, a flower that symbolized new beginnings, growth, and beauty. She had always admired the delicate, fragrant blossoms, and in a way, they reminded her of herself. She too had been through a storm, but now she was ready to grow again, stronger and more beautiful than before.
The next weekend, Maya made her way to the local nursery. She spent hours carefully choosing the perfect jasmine plant, picking one with vibrant green leaves and buds that were just beginning to bloom. It was a simple act, planting a tree, but to her it represented so much more. It was her way of marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a new chapter in her life, one that was all about reclaiming her space, her peace, and her future. Back at the mansion, she dug a small hole in the soil where the old magnolia had once stood. As she planted the jasmine, she thought of her father, the man who had once been so hard on her, who had never been able to show her the love she had craved, the man who, despite his flaws, had seen her worth, even if he never had the courage to say it. In a way, this jasmine tree was for him too. It was a symbol of the quiet love that had always existed, even if it had never been spoken. As she stood back and looked at the tree, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. The garden, once barren and empty, now had something beautiful growing in it. And so did she. Her life, once full of pain and longing, was now full of possibility. She had let go of the past, of the rejection and the hurt, and had made room for something new. She wasn't waiting for anyone else to fill the void in her heart anymore. She had filled it herself, with the people and experiences that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, the jasmine began to bloom. Its delicate white flowers filled the air with a sweet fragrance, and Maya took comfort in watching it grow, knowing that it symbolized everything she had fought for: her independence, her strength, and her ability to embrace the future with open arms. Maya's life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. She had made new friends, people who appreciated her for who she truly was, not for her last name or her family's legacy. They were a diverse group, drawn together by their shared experiences and struggles. They were her community now, the family she had chosen. And with them, she felt truly seen, truly understood. No longer did she feel the need to prove herself or seek their approval. She was enough, just as she was. Her work at the community centre became more fulfilling with each passing day. She found herself helping others who had faced struggles similar to her own, people who had been rejected, misunderstood, or abandoned. She saw her own story reflected in their eyes, and in helping them, she found a sense of purpose that brought her immense joy. She wasn't just healing herself, she was helping others heal too. At night, Maya would sit on the back porch of her home, sipping tea as she watched the jasmine bloom under the moonlight. The soft scent of the flowers carried on the evening breeze, and Maya allowed herself to relax, to savour the peace she had finally found. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And she knew that, with each passing day, her new chapter was unfolding in the most beautiful way possible. Maya had come a long way from the woman who once sought validation from her family, from the girl who had fought for her place in a world that never truly accepted her. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace her own worth, and to build a life based on love and acceptance, not from others, but from herself. And as she sat there, surrounded by the beauty of her new life, she knew that the future held endless possibilities. No matter what came next, Maya was ready to face it. She was ready to write the next chapter of her life, and this time she would write it exactly as she wanted.